Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask-strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 942 for April 18th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
I was driving down the Golden Valley right by the brewery with my dad, and he's driving the Suburban. He's looking over the steering wheel, and I said, "Dad, why don't we do whiskey?" And he kept looking forward, and he said, "We're good at one thing and one thing only, and that's beer." So that was the end of the conversation, and I quickly said, "Okay, yes, sir." And I just wish I would have been more of a rebel, and we had some 20-year-old whiskey right now to share with folks.
That's David Coors of the Coors Whiskey Company, and yes, he is part of that Coors family. Molson Coors, one of the 800-pound gorillas of the beer business, has entered the whiskey world with its 5-Trail blended whiskey. The first 5-Trail release won a double gold medal this past week in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. And David Coors joins me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth to talk about his journey in whiskey from that point 20 years ago to today. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting this week department, your voice, behind the label, and
I'd take the keys to any Australian whiskey distillery, such as the quality that's coming out.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The San Francisco World Spirits Competition announced its medal winners this week. We are still waiting for the overall winners like Distiller of the Year to be announced, but Australian whiskies did extremely well in the medal count. 16 Aussie single malts took home double gold medals, and to put that into perspective, double gold means every one of the judges had to award a gold medal to that whiskey. Steve Beal has been a judge in the San Francisco competition for 22 years now and posted on our Facebook page that they had a first-ever perfect flight. All 10 whiskeys in the flight earned double gold medals. 7 of those 10 were Australians. Starward Distillery in Melbourne took home 12 of the 16 Australian double golds, along with 3 gold medals. Founder David Vitale was my guest on the Happy Hour live webcast Friday night.
The quality of Australian whiskey is amazing. Like, there's so many great distilleries in Australia that are making A-grade whiskey. I'd take the keys to any Australian whiskey distillery, such as the quality that's coming out. The big challenge is availability and inventory. And certainly we've been working on sort of scaling up the distillery ever since we started. And the liquid that we're drinking now is coming from an upgrade that we did in 2016 to the distillery, where we more than doubled our production. So it's exciting to kind of see that whiskey winning awards, but also the fact that for now we're not going to run out. There it is there.
Callington Mill Distillery in Tasmania took home the other 4 Australian double golds. In other news, 2 years ago, Diageo released Bulleit Blender's Select Bourbon, a new whiskey created by blender Ebony Major. At the time, she was the first black woman to serve as lead blender for a major whiskey brand, but she disappeared off the radar almost immediately after that. We now know why. Last week, she filed a lawsuit against Diageo, accusing the company of tolerating racial discrimination against her at the Bulleit Distillery in Kentucky, and eventually forcing her to resign. A Diageo spokesperson said in a statement to the New York Times that Major's complaints were handled internally and that the company does not tolerate discrimination of any kind. For the record, one of the allegations in her lawsuit was that Diageo ended her access to the media after the complaints. I should note that during that period, I made several requests to interview Ebony Major, but was told that she was either not available for interviews or was on a leave of absence. And full disclosure, Diageo is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. One other note from the legal arena. I reported a couple of months ago that Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey had been sued by a former New York-based salesperson over allegations of sexual harassment by a company executive. Just to close the loop on that story, the lawsuit has now been dismissed in a New York City federal court. The Kentucky Derby is just a couple of weeks away, and Woodford Reserve has unveiled this year's $1,000 mint julep cups. It's become an annual Derby tradition that raises money for the Old Friends Thoroughbred Retirement Home. There will be 130 sterling silver cups priced at $1,000 each, along with 18 gold cups that go for $2,500 each. This year's special mint julep recipe features ingredients found at France's Palace of Versailles, which was home to 3 of France's kings from the House of Bourbon. We'll be adding that French mint julep recipe to the cocktail collection at the WhiskyCast website. We are starting to see more 700 ml bottles being imported into the United States now that the European standard size has been legalized in the U.S., and that's having a knock-on effect for fans of the Glasgow Distillery Company in the U.K. The distillery's releases have always come in 500 ml bottles until now, but that is changing with plans to release the entire range in 700 ml size. That clears the way for those whiskeys to be exported to the U.S. for the first time. It's also a bonus for UK consumers who will not see a price increase for the larger bottles, which were also designed to use less glass than the original 500 ml bottles and be more environmentally efficient. Finally, scientists in Australia have developed a digital whiskey sniffing nose. The team claims a 96% accuracy rate for identifying a specific brand of whiskey using 8 different sensors. Nose-E, as it's called, successfully identified 3 different single malts and 3 different blends during testing. The device could eventually be used to identify counterfeit whiskeys, but don't ask it to write tasting notes.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Just one question. Who's Dave? You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at the WhiskyCast website and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Richard Patterson joins me this week on the Happy Hour Live webcast. We'll be on the road in Las Vegas at the Nth, along with the Dalmore's Craig Bridger on Friday. The fun starts at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. UK time, and 2 p.m. Vegas time on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you missed last Friday night's webcast with Starward's David Vitale, the on-demand replay is available right now at our YouTube channel. The podcast version drops later this week. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. In addition to the Nth this weekend in Las Vegas, the weekend also brings the Whiskey Fair in Limburg, Germany. The Spirit of Speyside Festival gets underway on April 27th and runs through May 2nd. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night in Washington, D.C. on the 28th. Whiskey on the Rocks runs from the 28th through May 1st in Sydney, Australia, and tickets are available for the HTX Whiskey Weekend in the Houston suburb of Spring, Texas, April 29th through May 1st. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. There were more than a few eyes raised when Coors announced its plans to get into the whiskey business last year. After all, it's part of the global Molson Coors conglomerate, but the Coors name has always been associated with beer until now. The debut release of 5 Trail took home a double gold this week in the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. David Coors heads up the Coors Whiskey Company and the Molson Coors fledgling spirits business. We talked last Thursday on a Zoom call. Your family's been in the brewing business for generations. Why get into whiskey now?
Well, that's a good question, and one I frequently get. There's probably a couple anecdotal stories that have led to it. One being that about 20 years ago, I was in college and I was dabbling in whiskey and interested by the category and the products that were out there. And I was home for Christmas break in between some semesters, and I was driving down the Golden Valley right by the brew with my dad, and he's driving the Suburban. He's looking over the steering wheel, and I said, "Dad, why don't we do whiskey?" And he kept looking forward, and he said, "We're good at one thing and one thing only, and that's beer." So that was the end of the conversation, and I quickly said, "Okay, yes, sir." And I just wish I would have been more of a rebel, and we had some 20-year-old whiskey right now to share with folks. But that was kind of the first dream that I had of getting into the space. And then, well, almost 3 years ago now, as a company, we decided to evolve beyond just beer. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to lead our ventures into the spirits category. And it was finally the chance for me to express myself in whiskey based on the dynamics of the category and the close association with beer and the manufacturing process. I said, okay, now's the time for us to launch a whiskey.
So where did 5 Trail come from?
The name 5 Trail, it's a nod to 5 generations of trailblazers. Is kind of the inspiration. These days, as you're probably well aware, it's nearly impossible to find a trademark or a name that's not utilized. So we went through revisions and revisions of names, and that's one that we kind of landed on and wasn't sure about at first, but it's grown on me for sure.
Now, your family's brewing record is exclusively Colorado, but for this, there's some collaboration with distillers in the Midwest. Explain how this worked and how you came to collaborate on this project. Because you didn't really need to, did you?
Well, we did to a certain extent. We're not ignorant in the fact that we're not experts in whiskey. Certainly, we're great on the beer side of things, but we could take the approach and say, well, we know how to do this, or we could try to find some great people to support us in this venture. And so one of those stories, you pull out the Rolodex, and one of my colleagues said, "Hey, do you remember a gentleman named Herb, and he's at Bardstown? Maybe you should just talk to him and he may be able to give you some insight into what's going on." And we had worked together in Chicago back in the day. And so he happened to be in Denver when we were exchanging emails. And I said, well, let's meet up for a burger. So we had a cheeseburger and we talked about it. And I said, I'm working on this project and making some progress. He said, well, you just got to come out to Bardstown. So we went out to Bardstown, and I had briefed them on a countertop blend that I'd come up with during COVID. I spent many of evenings and hours, after a long day of Teams and Zooms meetings. I sat there and I'd start playing with different whiskeys, and then got into the blending. And it just was one of those where, okay, I knew the components I kind of wanted, but we briefed Bardstown. We sat there for 2 days based on a blend I had created at home, and we evolved that over a 2-day period and landed with the blend that we have now in batch 1 of 5 Trail. But it was one of those where Bardstown gave us, support capabilities and some guidance along the journey.
So where did those whiskeys come from that you were blending on your table at home?
Well, we were at the time, as we had ventured into the space, I had samples being sent to me with businesses that were kind of interested in what we were doing and wanted to showcase their brands with us. I had talked with some other folks about how we could procure some barrels to get into this game. And so I had samples of that. And it was one of those where, someone had just mentioned, well, maybe you should just try creating some blends, because I knew I wanted the single malt, that used malt that we make right here in Golden, Colorado. And so I said, well, if I have that, I don't have enough just to release a single malt, but if I start blending it, okay, maybe we have something. And so we went on that journey from there.
So I'm assuming you had to work with a distillery in Colorado, since I'm assuming you didn't set up your own just for this project yet.
No, we've been growing barley and malting barley for almost 70 years now, and we've been selling our barley to our malted barley to brewers and distillers alike across Colorado and beyond. And so I was able to find some barrels that had our malt in it, that had some age on it that we could leverage in the product.
I know you can't say who these barrels came from or the provenance on them, but is it repeatable? Can you continue this long term, or do you have to come up with a second batch and a second blend at some point?
Well, so it's one of the reasons, a couple of reasons why we went down a batching approach was one, because we didn't have a consistent supply, and two, we thought it would be fun to bring drinkers something different over periods of time. So we are the concept of the blend is to have a batch process where I want to stay in a fairway of a flavor profile, because I really love where we've landed on a flavor profile perspective, but we'll put in, different whiskeys into the blend that may benefit it or bring some differences between each batch release that we do. And it's going to, as we get more and more into this game and trying to learn that art of blending, provide some fun opportunities, but also some challenges as well.
Might you build a distillery at some point to do your own malt at least?
Well, it's certainly something that we've discussed, but we're 7 months into this game and being in the marketplace for a short period of time that we're just one step at a time and trying not to get over the ski tips per se and get too carried away. But certainly it would be fun to have our own distillery at some point in time.
Tell me about the biggest difference between making beer and making whiskey that you've had to learn over the last 7 months.
Well, as you're probably well aware, and your fans and audience are, that the front end is quite similar. We're not putting hops in this stuff, but we know how to cook cereal. We know how to ferment it. We don't know how to distill, and certainly there's a great art and science to that process of it. And then the barrel aging process as well. Different chars, locations of where you age stuff, locations within a warehouse, even with where you age stuff. All of those factors have been a steep learning curve for us, and one that I've just been fascinated as I've learned more and more about whiskey and bourbon. I've just been fascinated with the science behind it and the dynamics behind it around, okay, what the art of possibility and the number of variables similar to brewing, temperatures and times and all that stuff, the mash bills, your ingredients play a number of different factors into the final product.
Does this open up any new product development possibilities for you on the beer side, say with a 5 Trail aged Coors beer?
Well, we do have a beer in Colorado called Colorado Native, which is brewed with 100% Colorado grown ingredients and only sold in Colorado. And we do have a barrel aged Imperial Porter that we've been selling, in the winter for, I think, the past 7 or 8 years or so. And that does sit in whiskey barrels for 2 to 3 years. And now we have the ability to do some further collaborations on that front and some exploration being done in that area.
And might you do a 5-trail finished in Coors barrels that had been used for maturing Coors?
There may be an opportunity this fall for something like that, or this winter, where we've taken some of those Imperial Porter barrels, we've decanted the beer, packaged it, and we've put some of our blend into some fun barrels for sure. So you're teasing out some of the future releases this later this year.
Well, that brings us to a good point. How far can you expand this range, given that you don't have your own source of supply?
Yeah, we're exploring that front, and again, being 7 months into this and still trying to learn the industry and the category and what consumers are looking for. We certainly have some ideas, and again, how we've developed this annual batching kind of process. Within each annual batch, we can do different series of releases. So, whether that be a barrel proof or cask finishing, or unique blends with some other older or limited, whiskeys that are out there and bourbons that we could put into a blend that we think fits within the banner of 5-Trail.
I want to take you back to that point 20 years or so ago. What got you into whiskey in the first place that made you suggest to your dad that you ought to make whiskey?
Well, actually the first instance was on a hunting trip with my dad and brother, father-son hunting trip that we used to do annually. And I'd finished the semester and I was tired and had a cold and sore throat. And so my dad poured me a glass of Crown Royal on the rocks and said, sip on this. And it soothed the sore throat. And I woke up the next morning feeling better. And I said, well, maybe there's something to this. And that was the beginning of a journey that was very casual for the past, or I guess the next 18 or so, 15 years. And then as this wonderful world of whiskey has opened up and so many more people getting into the space, I have friends that have taught me quite a bit in this space and have big cellars in their basements and whatnot. And being a fan of alcoholic beverages and curiosity led me down a journey with folks like that.
And you're in a state with a thriving craft distilling community. Have you had a chance to talk with a bunch of those folks?
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. Colorado, same thing on the beer side, a wonderful craft brewing scene across the state, and certainly now on the distilling side of things. And been really enjoying getting to know some of those folks and seeing what they're doing. And it's a fascinating category to see different people take different spins and expressions on how they see a whiskey or a bourbon coming to life. And it's a community, just like on the brewing side of things. Oftentimes people build up this premonition that we're competitive. And we, on the beer side, we like to go after each other a little bit, but if you go down to the brewers level, there's so many different brewers that our brewers have helped out over the years, establishing their businesses and distilleries alike as we sell them malt and whatnot. So there is a tight community across the industries, I think, that you can see more and more frequently these days.
Give me a sense of where this fits into the overall Miller Coors portfolio. And I think I'm getting it right, between Miller Coors, Molson Coors, and the various iterations over the years. I'm assuming that your sales amount to a rounding error when it comes to the overall company, but I'm assuming also that there are plans for that to change.
Yeah, so and we have had a number of iterations where Molson Coors technically now, but in the U.S. and globally, and that is the beast that we sit within. And it's one of those where as a business, you need to constantly evolve and innovate and test new opportunities and categories. And it's one of those where we're just really testing out right now what the art of possibility is. And we're trying to take as much of a humble approach of saying, we don't know this. We're not experts in this field, and we don't want to come charging in and and say we know everything and we're going to steal all this market share and whatnot. I think the category is healthy. It's growing. We want to participate in that. And time will tell where our place in the category is.
How do you define success 5 years from now?
Well, I've got a business case I got to deliver. So I guess if we deliver on the business case, keep the powers that be happy and the finance folks happy. But one step on that journey actually happened yesterday when San Francisco World Spirits Competition released the results, and Vibe Trail won a double gold. And boy, what a great validating feeling to have an institution like that recognize the quality of our product. And there's satisfaction in that in itself of, okay, at least we're proving that we can be a participant and high quality participant in the category.
Which is more fun, blending whiskeys or making beer?
Well, I'll tell you, at the end of the day, either way, you're sitting down at a bar with friends and colleagues, and it's hard to say. I would say that's the best thing about this industry. I mean, honestly, we have bars in our most of our breweries and offices, and you solve more problems in 30 minutes to an hour over a glass of beer or whiskey than you do all day sitting in meetings. So being able to celebrate and enjoy the products that you spend all day working on together is one of the wonderful blessings of being a part of the business.
You'll find my tasting notes for 5 Trail at the WhiskyCast website. And that's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret, hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies. Comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the new Tennessee whiskey from Sweetens Cove. As we reported last time around, it's a blend of bourbons from Kentucky and Tennessee finished in toasted sugar maple barrels. It's bottled at 55.35% ABV. The nose is sweet with touches of honeycomb, dried fruits, vanilla, and soft oak. The taste has a good balance of spices and fruity sweetness with notes of red apples, allspice, honeycomb, and oak tannins. The finish, long with dry spices and a nice oakiness. I'm scoring the Sweetens Cove Tennessee Bourbon a 91. Barrel Bourbon is out with the latest batch of its cask-strength bourbon, blended from several different distilleries. Batch number 32 is bottled at 57.67% ABV. The nose has touches of wood spices, caramel, honey, and vanilla. The taste has notes of red apples, peaches, honey, and hints of black pepper and allspice, with a nice balance. The finish is long, with a lingering touch of spices and fruity sweetness. I'm scoring Barrel Bourbon, batch number 32, a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey, reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore Farm and Waterfront Distillery. In-person tastings are available now at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. Visit sagamorespirit.com. Please drink responsibly. Last week, Old Elk's Greg Metz told us about the first 2 whiskeys in his Masters Blend series. His double wheat whiskey is a blend of Old Elk's wheated bourbon and Old Elk wheat whiskey. It's about 71% wheat in the mash bill and bottled at 53.55% ABV. The nose is soft with a nice aroma of fresh bread dough, a hint of honey, linseed oil, and vanilla. The taste is fruity and tart with lemon zest, red apples, honey, linseed oil, and just a hint of allspice. The finish is long and fruity with a hint of spice, and I'm scoring the Old Elk Double Wheat Whiskey a 92. Old Elk's 4-grain bourbon is bottled at 52.95% ABV. The nose has touches of almond oil, vanilla beans, a hint of butterscotch, and soft oak. The taste has notes of almonds, vanilla, and a hint of maple syrup that comes out as subtle touches of black pepper and allspice fade. The finish is long and sweet with a lingering touch of spices, and I'm scoring the Old Elk 4-grain bourbon a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus. Thanks to Tim Joyce for his Instagram comments following last week's episode and our story on the Dant Crossing development. I apparently butchered the name of the town where the Dant family has built its log still distillery and a new amphitheater. It's Gethsemane, not Gethsemane. Thank you, Tim. Rick Adams asked for a retweet on his post about a Pappy Van Winkle raffle to help Champ Camp and Make-A-Wish of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky build a wheelchair-accessible treehouse for kids at Bradford Woods in southern Indiana. Always glad to retweet stuff like that. You can find the link on my Twitter timeline. Sharon at the Boring Books for Bedtime Sleep podcast asked for some help in this tweet. For the past 7 weeks, I've spent every spare moment and so much more packing my 81-year-old mother's house to move her to a new condo. This resulted in a curious find, an unopened bottle of Canadian Club whiskey from 1934. Mom has no idea where it came from, and the Angels have taken more than a share from this sealed bottle of what is likely terrible whiskey. I kind of want to open it, but 1934? This bottle was imported right after Prohibition was repealed, which is a bit cool. Well, Sharon, open it and enjoy it. Old Canadian Club can be really, really good. I've tasted some from the 1950s, and if you don't want to try it, let me know. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine and More store in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. This weekend, Mike W. Simpson tweeted a photo of a cloudy bottle of Glenmorangie 10-year-old with this comment. Just pulled this bottle out of the box. What am I looking at here in the bottle? Well, Mike, what you have there is a classic example of flocculation. And no, it's not as dirty as that sounds. Flocculation happens when some of the fatty compounds and other components of a whiskey come out of solution as a whiskey sits in the bottle. Those compounds actually add flavor and texture to a whiskey, though the cloudiness and the solids that can appear in the bottle may make it look bad to some people. It's the reason why whiskeys are often chill-filtered, but there's an ongoing debate over whether that filtering does affect the flavor of a whiskey. It's also why you see a lot of whiskeys bottled at 46% ABV or stronger, since the higher strength prevents those compounds from coming out of solution. The danger zone is between 40 and 46%, which is why you'll see a lot of whiskeys in that range being chill-filtered. Mike, just shake the bottle gently before you open it, and things should return to normal. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to November of 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.